quiz 8?
Due today. Quiz 8 expansion, due today, 11:59.
Okay.
It says Monday, November 15th for me.
Well, that's sweet. So if it's...
Okay, well, let me check inside the quiz real quick. See what's wrong. It may be marked the due date inside the quiz, so. Goodness gracious, you're late. I mean, you're not really late, but you're usually here first.
In 4 minutes.
And Miss Bliss usually comes stumbling in about 5 minutes late.
I've never been late.
Oh, okay, okay.
I've never been late.
You follow the rule. You can go out and play all you want, but you gotta get to work on time. That's
I
fair
do.
enough. That's fair enough.
I had work this morning, and we made it.
Overstreet. Do you know how many miles Dom's run already? How many has he run?
Not the number he needs.
Yeah.
He's still a ways away.
Dude, it's not that hard. Run 2 miles, but you get it done in a week.
Good morning, Dahuka. Your mic's open.
Morning.
I'm hearing all your secrets. Everybody's here. That's wonderful.
Look at us go, thriving.
Hey, Dahuka, what was the deal last class when everybody just got up and walked out? Did you have a fire thing or something?
No, something.
We had to go watch one of our students sign.
Oh, okay, that's fair enough. That's a special event, I guess.
Coach Overstreet sent you an email.
What? Yeah,
Coach
we did
Overstreet
that.
sent you.
Yeah. Coach Overstreet has to be careful because I know his family. I can check up on him.
Uh-oh.
That's one of the things about the small town world that we live in.
We love small hometowns. They're the fave.
There you go. Okay. The light's kind of terrible in here, but we don't care. You don't need to see me that clearly anyway. One of my big secrets is that at one point when I was in college, I was studying theater arts. That was just before I got kicked out the first time.
The first time? What happened the second time?
Well, I didn't ever get kicked out of college. Really, I left, but they invited me to leave.
They invited me.
So, yeah, I came back when I was hungrier to learn, and college was really fun. the second time I went at it, and I kept right on going. Okay, so we've got quizzes up, that's what I'm looking at right now, guys. Quiz 8 is up. Something else I wanted to show you. Come on, machine. Let's turn that thing off again. There's a switch that's supposed to stay on all the time, and someone comes in here and messes with it. Yeah, that's quiz 8. Should take you about 5 minutes to take it. Now what I'm trying to do is show you something else. If you look on your course menu, there's now a button visible that says course evaluation. Please push that button sometime in the weekend and say something on the evaluation, just so I can count heads and say, you know, lots of people answered the questions. We actually appreciate your input on this. If you want to talk about technical issues like, boy, this ITV system is not so great or whatever, feel free. That's how we create pressure to get things fixed. Please take a few minutes to do it. Yeah, there's a student in this room who claims that some teachers give extra credit for filling this out. I do not, because I consider that to be bribery, and I consider that to be dishonest. If you can't persuade your students to fill the thing out, then you're not doing a very good job.
I've already filled it out, so.
Congratulations, good for you. Every class has one, by the way.
Yeah.
For those of you who are taking a full schedule,
I
there
did.
should be an evaluation for every class.
I completed all of the evaluations for
We used to do it on paper, and the teacher had to leave the room, and another teacher would have to come in, and they would spend 10 minutes, and that teacher would kind of lean on them until they got it done, and then they would hand them all in, and that teacher would put them in a sealed envelope, and walk off to the office with it, and the original teacher could come back. It's kind of a bunch of baloney to do that. You have it now on your computer. Please do it sooner rather than later, because there's some kind of a cutout date, and then the bean counters get all upset about it, and we wouldn't want to upset the bean counters. You'll find out in life that, do you know what bean counters are?
No.
Those are the people that keep all the numbers and the statistics.
Really there, baby.
They don't know who you are, they just know that you're a number, right?
Okay.
Okay? But they're also the ones that have to balance the books and make the school able to continue living. So, it's a little bit important. It's more than a little bit important. Okay, let's talk about history. That's what we're here for. And we're still working on a PowerPoint that you have about westward expansion, or westward movement. We're almost done with it. Then we're going to jump over to one called, I don't know if you can even see it, that screen's so small. Make it bigger? Make it bigger? Not much. Then we're going to jump into one called Culture, Politics, and the Antebellum Period, and we'll talk about that when we get there. So I think we ended up last time, before we were rudely interrupted by Tahoka's signing ceremony. You guys, there's my propaganda from yesterday's class. We're out of that now. We're even past the Veterans Day now. I got my free meal last night, so I'm happy.
Where at?
I can't tell you where it is because that would be a paid advertisement
Paid advertisement.
or an establishment.
I bet I could guess.
But I got a free meal anyway.
Chili's?
I had to pay for the alcohol though.
Chili's?
No, not Chili's.
All right, welcome.
Cracker Barrel?
I don't like going to the big places where you have to stand in line forever.
Cracker Barrel?
I go to a place where they recognize my face and they hop right out there and say, do you want your regular? And I say yes. And that's all I have to say.
Chicken fried steak?
That's the only word I say is yes. Especially for someone. Okay.
Hey, what does that say? Wow.
What kind of establishment? Reasonable establishment. People take their children there.
I'm a child.
Okay, we're back to the election of 1844. The Democrats, kind of the leading Democrat in 1844 is still Martin Van Buren. He'd been president, but he didn't win the last election. But Martin Van Buren was against admitting Texas into the Union. Wait a minute. We don't need to talk. Yeah, we do. I get lost, okay.
I was gonna say we talked about it.
What?
It's like we've talked about it already.
We've talked about it a little bit. So they dropped him, and they're gonna pick up a guy named Polk. And Mr. Polk used to be the Speaker of the House of Representatives, and one time after that, he was the governor of Tennessee, and probably politically more important, he was kind of one of the proteges of Andrew Jackson, who was still alive, still back in the shadows at the Hermitage where he lived, kind of waving a wand over the world and controlling a lot of politics. The Whigs picked Henry Clay, who was one of the founders of the Whig Party, if you want to call it a party. He's also against annexing Texas, but he's going to tiptoe around it because he doesn't want to make anybody mad. He's being very careful to try and get elected this time. Unfortunately, he's so careful that he doesn't get elected. Let's look at his... By the way, there are actually 3 parties competing here. There's also a party called the Liberty Party. They're going to take some of the votes away from Henry Clay. Their whole issue in life was abolition of slavery. That issue is going to grow and become more powerful, but at this time it doesn't draw enough votes. And it certainly doesn't draw a whole lot of votes from the South. Clay's platform, he didn't like the annexation of Texas. Why? Why didn't they want Texas in the Union?
Because it messed up the slaves.
Because it would mess up the balance, pro-slave and anti-slave states. And now there's 2 threats if you do that. One threat is you can cause conflict in between the people of the North and the people of the South. The other threat is if you bring Texas into the Union, you might create conflict between the United States and Mexico. So Clay was kind of wishy-washy and all that. He also didn't want to get in a fight with Britain over the Oregon country, but he supports negotiation or something like that. That's fine. Nobody was worried about that. And he wanted a tariff because he supports his American system, and part of the American system, remember, it was in favor of the national bank, it was in favor of federal improvements, building highways and things like that, and it was in favor of a protective tariff to help our industry grow. That probably also lost him some votes because Southerners didn't like the tariff. Polk's platform was kind of interesting, kind of fun, not kind of fun, kind of different, let's put it that way. He said, yeah, we'll reestablish that independent treasury. Whoops, where did it go? Thank you. We'll get the independent treasury back because the government doesn't have any place to put its funds. We'll reduce tariffs, that's as opposed to what Clay wanted to do. And then he says, because he knows the American public's interested in this, we will acquire some or all of that area that they call Oregon country. Remember, Oregon country went from about 42 degrees north all the way up to 54 degrees, 40 minutes north. Which, if you look on the map nowadays, that's way up in Alaska and Yukon territory in Canada. He also promised, if he was elected, to get some or all of California and New Mexico. He didn't stipulate how we were going to get it. Maybe we were going to buy it. In fact, we did try to buy it. We'd already tried to buy it a couple of times without success. That was his platform. Now, there were a couple of other things, and the really crucial issue in the election of 1844. Do you favor or do you not favor bringing Texas into the Union? That was the big issue. And he favored bringing it in, and he stated in no uncertain terms, the day I'm in office, the first thing I will do is begin the process of bringing Texas into the Union. Who's that a message to? It's a message to the American people, vote for me because I'll do this. It's also a message to our friends south of the border down in Mexico City. Here's what I'm planning to do. And that's very significant, that message. Okay, there he is. 11th President of the United States. There's his cabinet. Got it memorized? Good. Okay. He's still not president. John Tyler is still the president until the 4th of March, 1845. He wanted Texas into the Union also, and he had never had success in getting it in because the United States Senate kept blocking it. At the very last minute, before he leaves office, he gets an idea. Okay, we won't do it like a treaty where the Senate has to ratify it. We'll do it as a joint resolution of Congress. So he called Congress into joint session and said, kind of, everybody hold your hand up. Who's in favor of bringing Texas in? Who's not? And the Congress voted in favor of bringing Texas into the Union. So at least informally, no agreement's been reached with the Republic of Texas, but at least informally now, annexation of Texas is approved. I don't know whether he did that to poke his finger in Polk's eye, just so that Polk couldn't say he did it, or whether he just thought it was a good practical thing that he wanted to do all along. On the 4th of March, Polk's inaugurated. On the 6th of March, Mexico breaks diplomatic relations with the United States because they know what the election of Polk means. In July, and if you do your readings, you'll read what Polk says about this. In July of 1845, Polk sends Colonel Zachary Taylor, is going to be a brigadier general pretty quickly, down to Texas with a force of 1,200 men to the general area of the Nueces River. Now, let's see if I can find a map for you for a sec. There's a map. If you look at this map, I'm assuming you don't know your geography that well. Maybe that's not fair. You see the Red River, and where it runs. The first river that empties in the Gulf of Mexico out of Texas, in Texas, is the Brazos. You go a little bit further south, you get to the Nueces River that comes out where Corpus Christi is now. And then you go even further south, and you get to the Rio Grande. By the way, they also called it the Rio del Norte back then, which indicates maybe that it's the northern part of Mexico. But we won't get in that argument. Anyway, Mexico's position, number one, is that Texas really isn't independent even though that treaty was signed, because it wasn't a valid treaty. Their fallback position number two argument was, okay, Texas is independent, but it only goes as far south as the Nueces River. Now, Texas argued, on the other side, our border goes all the way to the Rio Grande. And our western border is even the Rio Grande, as it goes to the north. In fact, they claim way up in the direction of Colorado even. They're claiming a whole hunk of territory. So, when Zachary Taylor is bringing military down to the Nueces River, they're kind of right on the edge of things. It doesn't tell them to do anything, be in a state of readiness. And I'll give you kind of a spoiler alert. We'll look back at this map. Somehow or other, without making a big deal out of it, Zachary Taylor also tells the United States Navy to send a couple of squadrons out into the Pacific. Now this is going to take a while, so I'm not sure exactly when he sent them. But they'll be out along the coast, the western coast of the main part of Mexico. They'll be along the coast of Baja California, and even somewhere relatively near the coast. Hang on for a sec here. Somewhere near the coast of what we now call California, which the Mexicans called Alta California. I guess they're out there training. What are they out there doing? What are they up to? There's also some off the eastern coast of Mexico. So now we've got some soldiers along the Nueces. Not to mention there's some other military units here and there, not too far away from the border. Okay. Let's go back to our chronology of events. He also sends in November, same year, 1845, a diplomat down to Mexico. It's a secret mission. And he approaches the government in Mexico City and says, we're interested in buying the territory of California, maybe part of it. We're interested in buying the territory, at least the northern part of the territory you call Nuevo Mexico, New Mexico. What do you think about taking $30 million? You agreed to the border of Texas being the Rio Grande. You agreed to sell us part or all of California. What do you think of that? And the government of Mexico was not really rich. And they were kind of going back and forth, thinking about it. Slidell hung around for quite a while. And right when it looked like maybe they'd say, yeah, we'll take the money, there was a coup, and the Mexican army overthrew the Mexican government and took control. And they said to Mr. Slidell, get out of here. Go away. We're not selling anything. At this point, Zachary Taylor, we have to assume told him to do this, now slides his troops a little bit further from the Nueces River and a little bit closer to the Rio Grande. In fact, now he's got more than 3,000 men. And now he's a brigadier general instead of a colonel. And he's going to go down and he's going to build a fort down there. It's opposite Matamoros. When you get a little bit older and you start taking your spring breaks, some people like to go down to Matamoros for their spring breaks. I'm not suggesting it's not good for your health. Bad things happen. One of my friend's kids was sitting on the back of a pickup truck. He fell off the back of the truck. They'd all been drinking. They just kept right on driving. They didn't know he fell off the truck. He had amnesia for about 3 weeks. He was in a hospital. He didn't know who he was or where he was. So sometimes spring break, better to stay at home. At any rate, enough for the sermon. Slidell comes back to Washington. Zachary Taylor's got 3,000 plus down across from Matamoros. He's going to build a couple forts down there. One of them's Fort Brown. They'll have some outposts out along the borderline or along the northern banks of the Rio Grande River. One outpost he calls Fort Texas. It doesn't have that many men in it. And on the 25th of April, we've gone into 1846 now. On the 25th of April, a Mexican general takes 2,000 soldiers across the Rio Grande River into that disputed territory and attacks Fort Texas. Now there's different stories about whether they attacked an American patrol. I think it was actually in a little fort. And they wiped it out. They killed some Americans, about 16 Americans. They captured a bunch of Americans. And Zachary Taylor responds. You can almost always a military commander is allowed to fight back if he's attacked. He's going to attack, and on the 8th of May, he will defeat a Mexican force at the Battle of Palo Alto. It's one of these kind of battles where, while the smoke was still in the air and all that, you really didn't know who won. But when the smoke cleared, the Mexican army had retreated and left. So the Americans consider it our first victory. The president is going to go to Congress and make a speech, which I assume all of you have already read, since it was in your readings. And basically he tells Congress, our blood has been shed on our territory, and we have no choice but to go to war, because the war has already started. He's asking Congress to declare war. Sometime later, a young gentleman from Illinois, you may or may not recognize him since he doesn't have his beard in that picture, but he made the comment that President Polk's war speech was like the half-insane mumbling of a fever dream, which wasn't particularly respectful of the president. I had some questions about that in the quiz, so read it. Okay. So I mentioned to you that everyone seemed to be ready to attack Mexico long before the incident that started the war. You can make your own judgment about that. When we get done, I'll make a judgment. But the war Zachary Taylor begins to advance further south. But he's not the first one that really has a major victory, because way up in California, there's a fellow named John Fremont, sometimes explorer, surveyor, Army officer, young Army officer. He's going to marry well. He's going to marry a very important senator and get promoted more quickly that way, I think. They called him the Pathfinder because he mapped out a lot of trails going to the West Coast. I think he went along with Kit Carson and people like that who really did the pathfinding. He was kind of a self-advertising kind of guy. But he's going to take the town of Sonoma, California, and declare a new republic there called the Republic of California. That's when they're going to get their bear flag. They call it the bear flag republic. Didn't last very long because on the 7th of July, the U.S. Navy will seize Monterey, California, and claim all of California for the United States. About 3 weeks later, maybe not 3 full weeks, another naval officer comes in and relieves that naval officer, another commodore, a guy named Robert Stockton, and he's going to declare himself the governor of California. He'll go down and take Los Angeles. So which is the capital? Well, I'll leave that for you to figure out. At any rate, at the same time he's doing that, here's all these pieces are moving around that must have been planned a long time in advance. A colonel named Stephen Kearny lives in the Department of Missouri, which is the westernmost American military concentration, marches with 2,500 men into Santa Fe, New Mexico, and claims that for the United States. No resistance. The people of Santa Fe didn't even, most of them were of Hispanic origin, most of them didn't care very much for the Mexican authorities there, so they had no complaints. He's going to leave most of that group of men to control that territory in case the Mexicans send up an army. He's going to take a few hundred and carry on to California. It's going to be a tough trip. He's going to end up the trip not on horses anymore. I think they ate some of their horses. It was that tough of a trip. They end up on mules, and they get out there, and there's only a little over 100 men left in his group. They get surrounded by Californios, the Mexican settlers of that area, and it looks like they may be in severe trouble. But a messenger gets out to the U.S. Navy off the coast, and Commodore Stockton sends in a force of Navy men and Marines, and they rescue Kearny, who presents his papers, which gives him the authority to be the governor of California. Orders from the President of the United States. So he'll now be the new governor. There's going to be fighting because the Californios aren't going to go along with this for a while, but eventually they can realize that the Americans are only going to have more and more and more people there. Plus, there are a lot of Americans in California. So they finally, at the end of, after fighting all through 1846, at the beginning of 1847, they're going to finally give up. Of course, they don't have the authority to make a treaty with another country. They're just one state in Mexico, but they're going to make a treaty anyway. So the U.S. is pretty much in total control of California. In February of 47, Zachary Taylor is going to meet with General Santa Anna at the Battle of Buena Vista, and it's a tough battle, but he's going to come out on top. Now there's a political issue. Here it is, February of 1847. President Polk is kind of doing what he promised he would do. Maybe he didn't promise he was going to go to war to do it. President Polk's a Democrat. General Taylor is now the darling of the American people because he's had all these victories, and he is a Whig. Oops. President Polk thinks maybe this isn't a good idea, having him be the great hero. So he can't just outright fire Zachary Taylor. So what he does is he starts taking away the troops under him, putting them under other generals in other places, and eventually he's going to have General Zachary Scott. We know very well about Zachary Scott, what am I saying, not Zachary Scott, Winfield Scott, Zachary Taylor, Winfield Scott, get it straight, Mr. Hunt. He's gonna send Winfield Scott down to Veracruz and tell him, capture Mexico City. Which is a big order. And he's gonna go right into the heart of Mexico. There's fighting at Veracruz, not too bad. He fights his way all the way to the outskirts of Mexico City. There's a fort kind of guarding Mexico City. There are several forts, but the biggest one is a fort called Chapultepec. And he's gonna take Chapultepec, and Mexico City is gonna throw open their gates and say, we surrender. Now, not everybody in Mexico City wanted to surrender, and there's a lot of guerrilla fighting, some street fighting and things like that. There's also guerrilla fighting because he's gone a long way in from the coast. By the way, the U.S. Navy's given him a lot of help. But when he gets far away from the Navy, he's got a long supply line, and the Mexican army keeps attacking the supply line. So he has to keep turning around and guarding his backside as well as going forward. But the writing's already on the wall. You know, the Mexican army's not going to win this. And they withdraw out of Mexico City. At the end of the year, Polk's going to call Zachary Taylor back. His message is, you've done a wonderful job, General Taylor. You're entitled to a rest. Come back to Washington. Of course, his real intent is just to get him out of the war so he doesn't get any more accolades. Santa Anna's still there and fighting. He takes one of the Mexican army's split into different big pieces. He's going to take his part of the Mexican army. He's going to try and attack the Americans from the rear. He's going to be defeated at the Battle of Humantia in October of '47. When Mexico City fell, so did the government of Mexico. And now they have a civilian government again. Well, no, they've got a military and civilian government in charge, but they've had to move all the way out of Mexico City, of course, to get away from the Americans. And when Santa Anna loses his battle in Humantia, they fire him. Now he's got no army. At least in theory, he's got no army. The Mexican government's back. Their headquarters is a villa out west of Mexico City called Guadalupe Hidalgo. The Americans have already got negotiators trying to negotiate with the Mexican government to end the war. The president hears bad things about his negotiator and fires him. The negotiator chooses not to hear that the president has fired him and continues to negotiate anyway. He gets a treaty from the Mexican government, sends it back to Washington. Polk looks at this and says, I thought he was fired. But he looks at the treaty and says, oh, what the heck, we've got a treaty. And he sends it to Congress and says, ratify it, please. And the Congress ratifies it. It's called the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. After it's ratified, or after it's delivered to the president anyway, there's a ceasefire announced because all sides realize this war is really over. The ceasefire starts in March of 1848 officially. The main fighting has been over with since Christmas. The treaty will go into effect in July. And the war's over. Some of the famous names, John C. Fremont, he's the guy that declared the Republic up in California. He eventually marries the daughter of Senator Thomas Hart Benton, which guarantees he's going to be general before long. Thomas Hart Benton had a lot of pull in Congress. At the painting of the Battle of Veracruz, which was one of the intermediate battles that Winfield Scott had to fight on the way into Mexico City. The Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo cost us $15 million in terms of what we agreed to give Mexico for all the territory that we were taking. We also agreed to indemnify them all the claims that American citizens had against the government of Mexico. We'll pay those off too. That's to the tune of $3 million or something like that, $3.5 million. We're going to get 529 square miles, not 529,000 square miles not 529,000 acres. You guys can do the math if you want. Multiply 529,000 by 640, and that's how many acres we get. It's a huge piece of land. And there's something else. We get something else. Because while the war has been going on, or at least in the middle of 1846, our Secretary of State, James Buchanan, negotiates with a gentleman from England by the name of Pakenham, a former Army general, or a former Army officer anyway, who's now a British diplomat, and they decide that they will divide Oregon country into two pieces. The Americans will get the southern piece, and that's everything below 49 degrees, or the 49th parallel. So that parallel that started from Lake of the Woods, west of Great Lakes, and went to the Rockies, now goes basically all the way to the Pacific. If you look on this map, it's right up in the upper left corner, you see a tree line, and it goes west all the way to the Straits of Juan de Fuca and the Gulf of Vancouver, in between Vancouver. Then it jiggles around Vancouver Island. We don't take that. And later on there'll be a fight about a bunch of little islands in that water, but basically that settles our issues. So now we have all of what we're now going to call Oregon Territory, which is eventually will become the states of Washington and Idaho and Oregon, and pieces of Montana and Wyoming even in that territory. So that's a big hunk of land. So we get 529,000 square miles down south, and all of that for the cost of course, the cost of war is not calculated into this, and it was probably pretty high. We also get roughly 68,000 Mexican citizens. And to those people, we say, welcome to the United States, although they haven't moved an inch. Welcome to the United States. You have some options. We will deal with you fairly. If you don't like us and you want to pack up all your possessions and go south, you will not be stopped. No one will bother you. If you want to stay and continue to own all of your land and all of your possessions, we won't interfere with your personal property, and you can become American citizens. So basically, we got at least 68,000 Mexican citizens who became instant American citizens. It'll take a while before they have the vote and all, but not long. Also not counted in this 529,000 square miles is the territory along the southern part of Texas, which now is certified as ending at the Rio Grande River. So what did Polk do? He did what he promised. He reestablished the independent treasury system. He reduced tariffs. He got a big hunk of Oregon country, and he got California and New Mexico. And this is New Mexico territory. It's not the state of New Mexico. It includes everything that's got Arizona in it, Nevada, bits and pieces of Utah even. So it was a big hunk of land. He also, by the by, got the U.S. Navy reorganized because it was so useful during the war, and builds on that, gets Texas firmly anchored in the Union, and doesn't run for re-election because he promised that if he got all this done in 4 years, he wouldn't run for a second term. So he keeps his word. And we're at the end of that set of PowerPoints. Let's look at the next one that we have. I think you have it, you may not. We'll have to go through part of it because it's repetitive of what we've already studied. And we'll get down to the slide that you've already seen, the population growth. And along with the 68,000 new instant citizens that we got from the Mexican cession, we're really growing. 1800, 5.3 million. Now it's almost 1850, we've got over 23 million people. You figure out what percentage growth that is. That is an enormous, enormous growth. We've multiplied more than 4 times. And the territory we've got is incredible. Now we have territory from coast to coast. Some of the immigration, here's a note, we're going to talk about some social issues. Some of the immigration that we got came from two countries that were having their problems in Europe. The first was Ireland, who were dominated by the British, whose land was controlled by the British, whose people were mainly farmers, and they had one crop. As in the southern United States, we had cotton. In Ireland, they had potatoes. These people were never rich. They lived from, day to day. Laws were draconian. What do I mean by that? Laws were severe. For example, if you were starving and you crawled over somebody's fence and you stole a couple of ears of corn, you could go to prison for life. You could be deported to a prison colony somewhere. It was that draconian. Wonder why the Irish don't like the English. 1 million, or maybe more than 1 million people died of starvation because there was a potato blight and it wiped out the potato crops starting about 1845. So a lot of these people started leaving the country. If you count the number of people that died of starvation with the number of people that left the country, they lost somewhere around 25% of their whole population. A lot of them went to Scotland first. That's why you often hear about Americans who say they're of Scots-Irish origin, because those people were kind of mixed together. And they didn't really have much room for them in Scotland, so eventually a lot of them are going to look at America as a place of safety to go to. And the problem with that, they didn't have any money. So how are they going to get to America? The cheapest way to get to America was to buy a place in an empty cargo ship that was returning after delivering goods to Europe. But those cargo ships were not set up for passengers. They just went down and stayed in the cargo hold, sometimes for several weeks, maybe as long as 4 weeks. These were not speed ships. I think in the year 1847, if I'm not wrong, in the year 1847, somewhere in the vicinity of 50,000 Irish people died on the way across the Atlantic. You hear now in the news about refugee problems in the Mediterranean and things like that. This was even worse. But they were so desperate, even though they knew it was risky, that they took the risk. That's how desperate they were. When they reached America, they came to the big seaports like Boston, Philadelphia, New York. They got off those ships, dirt poor, nowhere to go. Some real friendly guys were out there with nice hats and all that, said, "Welcome to America. We have a place for you to live. We got a job for you. We've got everything you want. All you have to do is follow our advice when we tell you how to vote." Mainly the Democratic Party. They controlled giant blocks of Irish votes up in New York City, in Boston. I don't know about Philadelphia so much. For years and years and years. But these people didn't want to go out in the countryside. They did not want to be farmers anymore. They wanted jobs they'd heard about, like industrial jobs and things like that. Do you think they got those jobs? Hell no. They were the new guys. The new guys get the worst jobs. Who had the worst jobs up until this point, up in the north? Who would you guess had the worst jobs? In this room, somebody. Huh?
Picking cotton.
No, in the north.
Oh, the north.
In the north, who had the, because most of the immigrants did not go south. There were no jobs down there. Who are the people of African origin? Free black people. And they had the rotten jobs. Most of them. Some of them were very well educated and were wealthy. The Irish come in, some of them start taking away these jobs. So you start building an antipathy between the Irish immigrants and the African Americans, which lasted for a long, long time. You'll see signs of it after the First World War even. Signs of it after the Civil War. Signs of it during the Civil War. But they stayed in the cities. Now the other country that we started getting people from was Germany. And Germany's problem was totally different. In Germany there were revolutions going on. It was what they call a pan-German revolution. You have to understand, Germany wasn't a country. There were lots and lots of small principalities that belonged to what we call the Holy Roman Empire. That were German-speaking. And the people that ran the Holy Roman Empire, the wealthy people, the aristocrats, were the heart of the army of Germany. So the people of the cities got tired of this, rose up, tried to overthrow the German aristocracy, but the German aristocracy controlled the army. So they lose. And as soon as they lose, the German authorities start trying to mop up, catching all these rebels. So they just go piling out of Germany like rats leaving a sinking ship. A lot of them go to England. They're not terribly welcome in England, because England's got their own labor issues. And so they're going to start finding their way to America. Now, they have a similarity to the Irish, one similarity, and that is they tend to go as families, family units. They probably had a little bit more money than the Irish did when they went over there. These people weren't necessarily poverty-stricken people. These were people that were running from authority. Strangely enough, compared to the Irish, they did exactly the opposite when they got to America. They did not want to be in a big city where people would pay attention to who they were and what they were. They all wanted to be farmers, and they all learned how to do things. Some of them had no idea how to do it, but they learned how to be dairy farmers, how to make beer. Now, a lot of them didn't know how to make beer. And they're going to settle, not really the Wild West or anything like that, but they're going to settle in rural areas outside of major cities, like outside of Milwaukee, places like that, outside of St. Louis, where there was still a lot of land, not expensive land. And they're going to even find their way down into the hill countries of Texas, wherever they found the right atmosphere to do what they wanted to do, the right climate. There won't be quite as many as the Irish. The Irish had something just under 1 million in the big surge, and maybe more than that if you count over a period of 10, 15 years. But the Germans in the hundreds of thousands at least. Both the Irish and the Germans will play really, really important roles in the Civil War. They play really, really important roles in the time in development after that, in politics and all of that sort of thing. Of course, the Germans had forebears who'd already been to America, fighting on the side of the British and fighting some of them on the side of the Americans. So they also had people to give them advice on where to go and that sort of thing, who weren't political people trying to corral them and control them. So the outcome of them coming here was similar, but it was also very, very different. Another difference in between the Irish and the Germans, very few Irish said after a few years, I don't like it in America, I'm going back to Ireland. There was no future for them in Ireland. On the case of the Germans, they had maybe as many as 40% who would kind of settle in America and then maybe go back to Germany, and bring family back to America or whatever. So they had kind of a 40% return rate. So that would develop really strong connections between the German people and the American people in many senses. Also maybe with the Irish, but in a kind of different way. Okay. Big figures that we talk about, that we'll be talking about, like John C. Calhoun, we keep talking about him over and over again. Henry Clay, we'll still talk about him, the great compromiser, the American system. Daniel Webster. There you go. John C. Calhoun, Henry Clay, you know about Daniel Webster. Daniel Webster was a very interesting man. He was a great orator. He was a great lawyer. He wasn't really good at managing his money. I have great sympathy with him for that. But sometimes the fact that he was short on money caused him to sing the tune of whoever had the most money. He was our Secretary of State twice, ran for president once, argued some really important court cases that we've already studied, like McCulloch versus Maryland, Gibbons versus Ogden. Roger B. Taney, we're going to hear about again. He's the guy that Andrew Jackson made Chief Justice of the United States in return for helping him put all the money in the Fed banks. Let's talk about labor for a minute, and then we'll be done. We're running short on time. We didn't really have labor unions in America. Remember we talked about the girls working in the Lowell mills? They weren't really unions, but they were together because they lived together in dormitories and things like that. But the idea of unions was there, and there were strikes, more spontaneous than not. But there was a law on the books. It was what we call case law. A lot of laws exist that are kind of written laws and kind of tradition. And one law that we got from England was a law called the conspiracy law. And it was against the law to be engaged in a conspiracy. And the definition of a conspiracy was kind of in the eye of the beholder. If I owned a factory and my guys got together to go on strike, I could say they were conspiring against me and go to the authorities and get them arrested. And this happened often, so you're not going to have a labor union because just having a union can be viewed as a conspiracy. Until a court case between, I think, shoemakers, cordwainers they call them, and their employer went all the way to the High Court of the Supreme Court of Justice. I just call it on this slide the Massachusetts Supreme Court. That's not its real official name. The Chief Justice there was Lemuel Shaw, a famous judge. Never made it to the U.S. Supreme Court, but people still study him today in law school. And the holding of the court in this court case where these men were being tried for appealing a conviction for conspiracy was getting together to do something is only a conspiracy if you're planning to do something that's illegal. Up to that point, you could get them for almost anything. But the Commonwealth versus Hunt verdict in 1842 says, forming a union is not illegal in itself. Even demanding union consideration is not illegal in itself. Even going on strike is not illegal unless you're doing something during that strike that's illegal. And from that point on, you're going to see the beginnings of some labor unions. They're usually what we call craft unions. In one union, you only have people who make cigars, or in one union, you only have people who make shoes, or in one union, for example, the railroad. In the railroads, there's a lot of different jobs in a railroad. There was a separate union for the guys that drove the engines, the engineers. My sons are both engineers, but they're not train drivers. So when I use the word for train drivers, I'll always call them choo-choo drivers instead of engineers. There were also firemen in the railroads. What did the firemen do? They stoked the furnaces that made the steam engines go. They had their own separate union. There were also switchmen who did the track switches. They were a separate union. They were all trade by trade by trade, craft by craft by craft. You call them trade unions. Of course, big businessmen didn't like them. A lot of times when they had their meetings, they'd go to a hotel, they'd rent a big conference room in a hotel or someplace. As soon as the owner found out they were having a labor meeting there, he'd turn off the power. Early on it was the gas, later on it was the electricity when they had electricity. So sometimes the meeting would be concluded by matchlight. People would strike big matches and hold them up so they could find their way out of the building. The famous kind of match was an old kind of non-safety kitchen match. I don't know if you've ever seen them as a child. I don't think you can buy them most places now. You could strike that match across the seat of your pants if they were tight enough. You could strike it anywhere. You could strike it with your thumb if you were really good at it. They call those matches Loco Focos. That was the brand name. And they started calling these labor unions the Loco Focos as well. And they were a branch of the Democratic Party. The other big name there that I mentioned, and then we're going to turn this thing off, is Tammany Hall. That was the Democratic Party machine in New York. And they were almost like a sub-rosa government. You could get anything you wanted out of the government by going to Tammany Hall first. And
Your
flipping them
conference is
over.
scheduled to end in 2 minutes.
Thank you very much for reminding me. So remember Tammany Hall. We'll talk about that too after the Civil War a little bit. Thank you very much. Your quizzes are up. Get them done. They're due when the bell strikes midnight on Monday. So get them done.
Have a nice weekend.
Have a
Your conference is now over. Goodbye.